Mr. Wild, being interviewed by Mr. Wild
I love it.
on the Wildlife Club.
I wonder if we're distantly related.
Nah, definitely not. That sounds like the burn, doesn't it?
There's not many of us without the E on the end.
No, there's not. There's not. Um, all right, man. So you've been bringing to people's minds because there's an importance for it. There's a need in the community. Your story about addiction and recovery has helped other people. Lots of people now. How many people have come to you for help?
Well, hundreds over the last couple of years at least. And I could only imagine the ripple effect of that. So let's say thousands.
All right. So tell us your story, brother. Tell us what happened.
Yeah. Oh, bro. I mean, yeah, thank you for having me first and foremost. Yeah, my story is one of addiction, and it's probably not the sort of narrative that unfortunately is shared on a mainstream platform these days. It's becoming so, but yeah, I guess my mission really is to change the way in which we view and treat addiction. Full stop. And that started with my own journey. I could see, I can see now. I couldn't then, but I can see now these compulsions to want to escape reality from a very young age. In terms of substance abuse, when that sort of was more prevalent, and not even substance abuse, if anything, porn was probably my first uh, vice that I used to escape or to numb or to distract myself from reality.
Yeah.
I remember the sort of just that escape that was created through porn when I would have been young, man. I would have been single digits, 8 or 9 years old. Probably still had dial up internet. Probably took 5 minutes just to load one picture back then.
Yep.
Um, and I first found weed when I was about 11. Actually, I was 11 years old when I first smoked weed.
Mm.
And I remember that sense of relief that I found in smoking weed. I remember that sense of peace, finding a sense of safety or ease within myself. And I was like, oh, wow, okay. There's something here. Like, I like this feeling because I don't really like my default setting.
Mm.
So I continued. I wouldn't say I smoked regularly at that age. I was 11, 12 years old, would smoke every now and again. But it did become a lot more regular throughout my teens, throughout high school. Smoked, drank. Um, Again, it was not in no way was it out of control. In no way was I a quote unquote bad kid or a troubled kid. I did pretty well at school, um, but it was really socially acceptable. It was nothing outside of what a lot of my peers were doing. We'd go to school. Some of us were reasonably successful, whether it was academically or sports, things like that. But on the weekends, we'd get reasonably fucked up. We'd drink and we'd smoke a lot. It wasn't until probably I did a gap year when I finished school. I traveled throughout Europe, lived in the UK, picked up a few more habits over there, came back home, and when I sort of really kicked down another gear was when I separated or broke up with my sort of like young love, one of my first relationships, I guess high school sweetheart, if you will.
Yeah.
And again, what I know now and what I can look back on is just the heartbreak, the emotions, the feelings, the felt sense that I didn't know how to be with. I didn't know how to feel, full stop. No one teaches us how to fucking feel. No one teaches us how to process our emotions, especially as men. If anything, we're conditioned out of our emotions. We're conditioned out of feeling. We're conditioned away from just expressing ourselves. And yeah, there was a lot of heartbreak in that, as I'm sure a lot of people could relate to, thinking back to almost, probably any relationship separation they've gone through. And because of that, I chose to turn to the only thing that I knew worked for me, which again was drugs and alcohol. It's the perfect escape. It was the perfect way to numb. It was the perfect way to check out. It was the perfect way to disconnect from ultimately myself and my felt sense and my emotions. perfect way to disconnect from the hurt and the pain that I was experiencing at the time. And I just took it to the extreme. I was one of those people that, really took it to the nth degree. I was, by 22 years old, I was a full-blown drug addict and alcoholic, basically living in my car, driving from dealer to dealer and bottle store to bottle store, just drinking and drugging myself into oblivion. Oh man, like I'm so grateful. I've had, so much support from family along this journey, and I owe a lot to the support that I have had from family members throughout this journey and process that I've been through. And again, they knew something was up. I knew something was up. I had no idea what addiction was, what it looked like, what it meant, how. Definitely had no idea how the hell to stop. They had an understanding of what was going on, but I think through conversations they had with family members and friends, that they also knew full well that there was nothing they could do until I really wanted some support, wanted some help, wanted to put my hand up, and wanted to make some changes. And sure enough, it came. It came in the way of actually I was passed out on a random street. I couldn't even tell you where I was to this day. No, not a clue. But I was passed out in my car in basically a sea of bottles. And I must have had the windows down, and somebody on the street thought they couldn't see me in it. Because they couldn't see me in it, all they saw was a car with the windows down that had been there for a while. They thought the car was stolen. So they actually ended up calling the cops. The cops proceeded to track the registration of the car, and the car at the time was registered to my dad. So they called my dad and they said, "Hey, is your car missing?" He said, "Well, no, my car isn't, but my son definitely is. Where is it?" Basically, like, "Can you please give me the address?" And thankfully they gave him the address, and Dad got there well before the cops, and just basically it was like looking up and just like being like, what is going on? How are you here? I didn't even know where I was, let alone I don't know how he knew where I was.
Yeah.
It was just this bizarre, surreal experience of just like, I've been in this like absolute place of oblivion for months. Basically, more or less kind of a missing person as far as my family's concerned. And I look up to see my dad. I'm just like, holy shit. He basically just sort of helps me out of the car, puts me in his car, drives me home, and they sit me down and said, "Drew, do you want help?" All I could manage out of my mouth was yes. Like, along with probably, I think, a fuckload of tears, like just this breakdown of just like, yes. Like there's this like almost a sense of immense relief when you just like can finally admit to yourself that you need help, you need support.
Yeah.
And I put my hand up and just said yes. And they had again been speaking to friends, and so we ended up going and visiting this rehab. I couldn't get in on the day, but they did what they needed to do in order for me to help support me with a detox. I detoxed throughout the weekend at home, and then I think maybe on Monday or Tuesday I checked into this rehabilitation center for the first time. And bro, in all honesty, I spoke about this on another live today. Like, it was this just immense sense of, there was a sense of uncertainty, but a huge sense of relief of just like, oh my God, like maybe this is something, maybe this is a solution. Maybe I finally get the answers to all of my problems that I've never been able to find or seek, or no one's been able to give me. And it kind of was, I got to spend, it was probably a month or 2 months in this facility surrounded by humans going through a shared experience. I remember having some of the best laughs in my life in rehab, bro. It's like, you're in amongst with maybe 20 or 30 other humans that have just done some of the more fucked up things that you've also done, that you think you've only done. And it's like the safe space to express this like absolute guilt, shame, and remorse, like especially the shame around some of the ways in which I showed up and behaved throughout that period of time. And just to have others be like, fuck, me too, was just like this huge sigh. It was just like, holy shit, I'm not alone. I'm not as fucking crazy and fucked up and insane as I thought I was. And yeah, like, okay, maybe I can do something different. And I did for a while. I was, I stayed in this facility for a time, and then, got this opportunity to learn a little bit about myself and how I worked and how I ticked and how I operated and where this all came from. And I still couldn't really get no one could really give me an answer as to why. I always had this answer, why? This question,
Yep.
why me? What is addiction? Where does this stem from? Why? No one could really actually answer me, bro. And these guys are meant to be trained professionals in the addiction space, right? They just said, well, you've got a disease for which there's no known cure. I thought, fuck, like, number one, that doesn't land or resonate. I don't feel that. That sounds like a load of shit, but I'll take your word for it because I don't know any better. And you guys are meant to be the pros here, right? So we'll roll with that for now. Okay, I've got a disease. Right, sure. All right, got a disease. There's no known cure. I've just got to do all these things that they ask me to do every day, and this is my life now. And I probably stayed clean and sober, on and off for a year. I, did all the right things, went to meetings, and we had an outpatient group at this rehab, and the guy that ran it was really supportive. There was a bunch of us that were quite young, so we would actually go out there most days throughout summer just to hang out, just to safe space. But yeah, man, like at 23 years old, my entire life had always been centered around drugs and alcohol. I worked in the radio industry. I ran events, like I ran parties. That was basically my job. I ran gigs, bro. Like that was my setup. I ran gigs and worked in the radio industry, set up events, things like that. So eventually, there was a reluctance to actually do the things that people suggested to me, and I ended up just back just doing my thing.
Yeah.
And again, for a time it was manageable. For a time it was okay. For a time it was kind of controllable and it was kind of accepted. But it didn't last too long, bro. Didn't take long for me to sort of fall back into the same patterns and habits and cycles as I used to. I ended up working in the liquor industry. I left the radio industry, worked in the liquor industry. Just this is this like insane behavior of the compulsive addict that kind of morphs his entire life into supporting the behaviors, right? So yeah, I started working in the liquor industry, managed to twist arms of doctors into benzo prescriptions. So I also had a really solid benzo Valium dependency, which was really dangerous because I also then had a way to sort of ultimately self-detox. So I never really sort of made it in front of the carers or the detox facilities that probably may have helped me stop or got me in front of the services and support people sooner than I did. Yeah, bro, that was my life for almost another 8 or 9 years. Was just like, don't get me wrong. When I was on, I was on. Like when I was on, I was all good. Life was somewhat manageable. I held down jobs. I actually ended up creating quite a successful health and wellness business when I was on. But when I was off and out the gate, like fuck, it was like playing a game of Russian roulette, bro. Like I never knew whether I was going to be out for a weekend. It was never a night. It was either a weekend or it was like 3 months. And I'd just be AWOL, like absolutely AWOL. And it was just chaos, bro. For 8 or 9 years, it was just chaos. It was, crashed cars, court dates, nights locked up, hospital visits, fights, accidental overdoses, just what you kind of see on movies. I guess it's kind of can be embellished often, but it was that bad. I would basically find pleasure in locking myself behind closed doors. It was never out in public. It might start that way. It might start at a party, but it was never carried on. It was always basically locked in a room of a flat somewhere, just drinking and drugging myself into oblivion. Along that journey, bro, my dad died. My dad was like a really he was one of the best men you could have ever met. Best mate, incredible human being, very well revered in his industry, looked up to, absolute pillar. And yeah, he got a brain tumor. And so slowly over sort of 3 years and a couple of brain surgeries, he ended up passing away. So you can only imagine the hurt and the pain. And again, as I spoke to at the start of this, right, the emotion, the felt sense that I didn't want to be with, the grief, the hurt, the loss, that once again, I had no idea how to be with. I had no one taught me how to feel.
Mm.
And this is one of the fundamental principles in what I teach and preach now. Is it's kind of built out of this foundation of this inability for humans to feel and process their emotions. And so because of that, more hurt, more pain, more trauma, I just chose to, again, drop another gear and put my foot down on the accelerator and drink and drug.
Without you
And
knowing it, you're actually calling in more pain, more pain.
100%. The more we shove down, the more we actually accentuate, or the more we need to suppress it, to numb it, to disconnect from it.
Yeah.
So the more I was shoving stuff down, the more I had to use or to drink over the top of to actually keep that hurt and pain at bay.
Yeah.
Amazingly, still throughout this process, Dad left me with two beautiful parting gifts with his death. One was like, your health is your wealth. As much as he was a phenomenal man, I don't ever remember seeing him work out or run or really move more than a walking pace. He was reasonably sedentary. He wasn't, obese or overweight. He probably had a bit of a gut, but he also, he didn't do a lot in that way to look after himself. He had a very high stress job, so that would have added to a lot of this. So it was kind of this imparting gift of like, your health is your wealth. Like, what are you without your health? Who are you without your health? You're nothing. So that was amazing. The other thing that he left me with, in some of these discussions that we had, as much as I wish I was more present when he was dying, I really wasn't. We still had some beautiful conversations, and I think he wished he did things a little bit differently. I think he wished he lived life a little bit differently, and he was just like, Drew, bro, do whatever the fuck makes you happy, man. Like, do what makes you happy. Fuck this bullshit narrative of going to university and climbing the corporate ladder and getting the degree and, trying to, again, choke yourself with a tie every morning and go to work 9 to 5. That's what he did. That was his life. And I think he wished he had a bit more freedom. And he's like, bro, just do what makes you happy. And so, although my life was quite chaotic when it was chaotic, when it wasn't, I was really sort of striving towards being a healthy version of me. And tied in with being a healthier version of me was also wanting to create some sort of business for myself. Like, I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I didn't really know what that meant at the time, but I knew I never wanted a boss. I knew I never wanted to answer to anybody else. I'd done that. I'd played that game, and I was like, there's got to be something else to this. So I actually ended up falling into an incredible health and wellness company with an amazing business model, and I started using their products, and I got incredible results and lost a ton of weight. And I sort of, I guess, became an associate for this company and did really well, became really quite successful. Although there were still times where I was completely out the gate and unreachable. I had an amazing team that just somehow stuck with me and sort of picked up the slack when I was, in those moments of escape. I tie this into the story because it was kind of the beginning of my final demise, as I like to frame it, was I actually ended up winning through this company. I won a full expenses paid trip to Las Vegas. Perfect place for an addict and alcoholic.
Isn't it just?
Oh my god, that place is literally built and is like that it's the breeding ground of, like, that's how they make their money. It's
Disneyland for a man with vices.
It's exactly that. Oh boy, was it what. I remember getting off the plane, I jumped in an Uber. I had full intention of, staying sober. Consciously I did, subconsciously I had a whole nother game plan. I told everybody, I'd set up all the systems in place to keep myself in check. Got off the plane, got in an Uber, no idea where I was going. Uber driver turned around and looked at me. I'd probably just put in some random address in the strip somewhere. He turned around, he looked at me, And he said, bro, do you smoke weed? I looked at him like, dude, I hadn't smoked weed in years. Like, I'd sort of felt like I'd graduated from weed into harder things by this point in my life. And he said, do you want to? It's legal here now. I just looked at him and I thought, split second, was like, fuck it, let's go. And so we went straight to a dispensary, dropped me off, went through this dispensary process, showed them my ID, had a bag of gummy bears and a couple of grams of weed. And then he dropped me back on the strip and dropped me at my hotel in one of the casinos. And of course, first thing that happened when I walked in the casino, they offered me a drink. All right, have a drink. Because I'd already let down my guard, let down my inhibitions, right? So I had to have a drink. A couple of hours after that, I was pretty drunk. Messaged a couple of guys back home who I knew had been to Vegas a few times, and they had hookups and contacts with gear and coke. They sent it through. Within another 2 hours, I had a couple of 8 balls of coke, and I was just out the fucking gate. Like, I was gone. I think 10 days in Las Vegas. Our keynote speaker was Tony Robbins. I was off my tits listening to Tony Robbins give his keynote speech.
Yeah.
As much as I can laugh at this now, it was pretty sad. I was in a pretty dire place. Drunk all the way back home came home through Hawaii. I was like drink driving my fucking hire car through Hawaii. Somehow made it onto the plane to get back to New Zealand. Got home. I don't really remember the transit through to home, and just basically just started drinking myself into oblivion. I was drinking between 1 and 2 bottles of vodka a day. I just drank to blackout. That was all I wanted. All I wanted was blackout. Didn't want to be conscious. I didn't want to feel anything. I just wanted nothingness. And drinking straight out of a vodka bottle is a pretty quick way to get there. And so I did. And again, thankfully, family members knew my patterns. They knew my habits. They knew my cycles. They knew if they couldn't get me on the phone that I was in one of my troughs, if you will. And they also knew that they couldn't do anything until I put my hand up and asked for help. Once again. So finally, after basically locking myself in this room for I don't know how long, manipulating people into bringing me alcohol, I don't know where I was getting food from. I was basically pissing and vomiting in a corner of my room. Like, it's not pretty. There's nothing glamorous about this stage of my life whatsoever. It's living hell. I was paranoid. Didn't want to. I'd wait until all my housemates had gone to bed to even like leave my room to maybe probably go and try and raid the fridge or use the toilet. Like, fucked up. And it just got to a point where I think I messaged a mentor that I had at the time living in the town that I was in. And I was just like, finally just put my hand up and was like, bro, I need help. Can you come round? And again, he was just waiting for that message. So pretty quickly he was there. My GP at the time knew what was up. He knew how to treat it. He knew what a detox looked like, and he knew the process, which is I was really grateful for at the time, because it can be a very painful process to find the right people that understand how to take someone through a detox at that time, especially when you need help in that moment. I've had moments where I've been turned away from detoxes or been told I've been put on a 6-month waiting list, which is just crazy. If you've got to get plugged into a public system, you're on a waiting list. That's the reality. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. You're on a waiting list. And to be told you're on a waiting list when you finally, after months or years of hell, put your hand up and ask for help, for someone to turn around and go, nah, like, sorry, we've got nothing for you. It's one of the most crippling experiences anyone in that situation can go through. And again, that takes me back to just being so grateful that I've always had resources to get the help that I've needed when I've needed it at the time, which a lot of people don't, unfortunately. So yeah, ended up detoxing, ended up back in rehab for the second time, and that was when something just shifted for me, bro. And I remember sitting on this like single bed. The beds that you only get in rehab, they give you these fucking single beds. So the only other time in my life I've had a single bed since I was probably about 5 years old. I was sitting on the end of this bed, just hands in my head, just fucking, how did I get here again? But not just how did I get here again, it was like this, like defeat and like, what's got to change? What's going to shift this time? What haven't I done? I was sitting there, I was like, bro, fuck, you know what? The only thing I haven't done is actually all the things that anybody's ever suggested to me. I've done everything to try and keep drugs and alcohol in my life. I've done bugger all to keep it out. I've done absolutely almost next to nothing to keep these things out of my life. In that moment, I was like, you know what? Like, this journey of healing, this journey of recovery, this journey of growth, this journey of self-development, whatever you want to call it, surely it can't be harder than the life I'm living now. Surely it can't be harder than the life that I've created for myself. So the fuck have I got to lose? Let's do it. Let's go all in on me. It was just this moment. It was just like, let's go. Let's do this. And yeah, I did, bro. I spent, the first year, this was over 5 years ago now. But I probably spent the first year just laying the foundational principles and frameworks of what it meant to stay just clean and sober, keep me away from the shit. No one had still answered this question of why. No one could still give me a clear answer of where addiction stems from, comes from. What is the birthplace of addiction? A lot of the systems I was getting plugged into, the narrative was still very much, you've got a disease for which there is no known cure. Didn't sit with me. Never did. Told you that from when I was 22 years old. Just didn't resonate. I don't believe that to be the truth. And so once I'd laid those basic foundations and I felt pretty comfortable that I didn't really have too much of a compulsion to turn to drugs or alcohol anymore. Again, this is really where I get to really honor the business I had created and the company that I was working for. There was a huge pillar and element of personal development that was aligned to this company. So I'd always been exposed to personal growth, personal development. People like Tony Robbins and David T.S. Wood and sort of those real like mainstream baseline, woo woo, cheer you up, let's do something different and create some change in your life humans, which was cool. And so after, nailing sort of what it meant to stay clean and sober, I just went all in on me. I was like, I had this, again, it was a moment, it was like a tipping point. It was like, I didn't come this far to just come this far. I didn't come this far to sit in dreary support groups and rooms, just continuously talking about what things were like and what things are like now. Like, it just didn't light me up. I'm like, surely this can't be my life forever. And so I just got really excited about personal development, bro, and learning a bit more about me and how I tick. And so I started working with different mentors all around the globe, addiction specialists, mentors, coaches, specialists, therapists, anyone that sort of, I just started following the breadcrumbs, bro, following the trail. Who's this going to lead me to next? What have they got to show me? What have they got to teach me? What can I learn from this person? And it was one particular room I was in, and it was kind of when the penny started to drop for me. I was in a room, and we started doing this exercise. It was a hugging exercise. So the room split into two, and one half of the room would just close their eyes and sort of open their arms up to receive a hug. And the other half of the room would go and give someone, complete stranger, basically, that you'd never met, a huge loving embrace. This person that was receiving had their eyes closed, so they had no idea who was giving them this hug. All whilst at the same time, the people that were facilitating this workshop were encouraging you just to lean into this experience, right? Lean into this experience. And there was this one moment where he said, and facilitator said, imagine as if this was someone you wished you could have this hug with today. And that fucking popped me. It cracked me, because I went straight to Dad. I was like, fuck, I wish everything in my heart and my soul that this was my father. I started bawling my eyes out, and we finished the exercise, and I was just bawling and bawling and bawling, and the facilitator again just said, what's going on? And I just said, you know what, bro, I've always cognitively in the head and the mind said I'm either really okay with my dad's death, or I just haven't been in the space or the environment to feel it, to process it, to let it come up to the surface. And I just said, now I've got my answer. This is it. I've never had or felt safe to, or known how to, or been in the right environment to feel and process this undigested life experience. And that's when the penny started to drop. I was like, shit, this has got nothing to do with the alcohol. This has got nothing to do with the drugs. This has got absolutely nothing to do with the thing.
Mm-hmm.
I say this all the time. The thing isn't the thing. It doesn't matter what you turn to, whether it's drugs, alcohol, porn, gambling, food, social media, gaming, Netflix, shitty relationships, sex, whatever that thing is, people pleasing. All that thing is a coping mechanism to help you deal with what you don't know how to deal with. It's a really good and effective and quick way to take away from the hurt, from the pain, to take away from the discomfort, the restlessness and the discontentedness that I had within me, this dis-ease. I definitely had a sense of dis-ease. I don't have a disease, but I definitely had a sense of dis-ease laying within me. And sure enough, like different practices, different workshops that I'd go to, more would come up to the surface. Different people I'd work with, more was coming up, more was coming out. And again, this is somatics, right? This is somatics. This is of the body. Feeling is a somatic experience. It's not a cognitive experience. You can't think your way out of a feeling. You've got to feel your way through a feeling. And that's, again, this is when the penny dropped. I was like, holy shit, this has got nothing to do with the drugs or the alcohol. This has got everything to do with the hurt and the pain. This has got everything to do with, AKA, the trauma. And I'll circle back to trauma because there's a bit of a misconception or preconceived idea as to what people think trauma is. But that's when I started to realize and piece together that, this isn't, like, let's fuck off the word addiction full stop and let's just call it a distraction. I wholeheartedly believe every single human on this planet has a distraction. They have something that they turn to when they just don't want to feel. They don't want to be in the full experience of life. They don't want to be in reality. They just want to check out. They want to numb. Some of us take it to extremes like I did. Some of us, drink ourselves to death or drug ourselves to death. Some of us get into an Instagram wormhole vortex for 3 hours a night. Some of us eat away our feelings. It's all the same. It's all rooted in the same foundations, right? Which is ultimately, we've got to stop looking at the addiction, as Mr. Gabor Mate says, and start looking at the hurt, start looking at the pain. So I just started piecing all these things together, bro, and started realizing that this is a conversation that not a lot of people were having about addiction. It wasn't mainstream yet. It is becoming that way. It's much more invited to have a conversation in unison around addiction and trauma at the same time than it ever used to be. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it was very much snubbed at. It was either addiction, like old school narrative was addiction is a choice, which just isn't in any way, shape, or form a truth. There's no way. It's not a choice. It's a trauma response. It's a safety mechanism. And then it was, and this comes from the 12-step narrative, which is, don't get me wrong, still an amazing program and organization and fellowship, but still doesn't quite get in and underneath to the roots in which it could, or I would like to see it. And that was very much that was the disease-based movement. You've got a disease for which there is no known cure, which my ego loved, by the way, because I already thought I was broken. I already thought I was fucked up. So someone telling me that I had a disease, I was like, fucking yes, I knew I was fucked up. But also by someone telling me I had a disease, I now had an excuse to bypass the actual real work, the actual depth of healing that I needed to go in order to take a look and dig up this stuff at the roots, because I just had a disease. So I didn't actually need to take a look inside if I just had a disease. It's a really convenient way to bypass the healing that's actually needed with addiction. So yeah, bro, like I just started piecing these bits of the puzzle together and started to realize that there's not many people talking about this. And I had, in a way and in a sense, already sort of been a coach or a mentor, and I always loved helping other people. And so, again, I remember just having this sort of dark night of the soul experience. And it was actually after I just moved to the Gold Coast. I just moved here. It was probably about 3 years ago. The woman I'd moved over here for, I'd broken up with. So I was going through, again, a bit more heartbreak, a bit more hurt, a bit more pain. I was struggling to find a job to support me. I'd left a bit of a financial support in New Zealand to move here. I was struggling to find some extra cash here in Australia. Just felt disconnected, bro. And I just kept getting this intuitive hit from my higher self, universe, God, source, whatever you want to call that. That was just this gentle nudge. It was like, bro, I've got everything you've ever wanted waiting. Like, it's just there. It's waiting for you. If you are willing to sit in your shit and sit in your discomfort. Like, this is your test. That's what's kind of what it felt like. I was like, this is your test. This is your proving ground. Are you going to sit? Are you going to feel? And are you going to embody what it is that I know you're here to show the world? Or are you going to run and hide and numb? And there's this place and moment in my life and time, I had no other choice but to just sit and be in my shit and be okay with not being okay, and to feel my way through what I was feeling my way through. And sure enough, I just had this light bulb moment. I was around at a mate's place, and he was a coach at the time, and he was building out some sort of coaching program, and he sort of showed me his framework. And I just looked at him, I was like, bro, is it that easy? Bro, it's that easy. Just show other people what's worked for you, what you know that may not be as accessible to people. As go and show them what's worked for you. Go and show them and share with them your story first and foremost, and then give them and arm them with the tools and practices that have helped you to get you to where you are today in a way that no one else is. And I was like, fuck, let's go, game on. And it just started with the live, bro. It was the scariest thing of my life, because I had never, ever fully, truly opened up and shared my whole story. And this would have been maybe, let's say, 3 years ago now. I'd always shared parts of my story, the nature of my business at the time. I would often do lives and talk about my weight loss journey. But I would never talk about my addiction journey. There was so much shame still attached to that journey for me. There was still so much stigma attached to that word addiction or addict, which I don't like, by the way. And anyway, bro, I remember I was at this old flat of mine on the Gold Coast, and I was sitting outside, and I just hit play. Oh, I thought, fuck it. It was one of the scariest things I've ever done, but I just, in a very short, it was probably like 8 minutes, I shared the super abridged version of my story and my journey. Extremely abridged version. It's still safe somewhere. And it felt like I'd shared it with the whole world. It literally felt like I'd shared the story with the whole world, and there was just so much freedom and liberation in the experience, and it just opened the floodgates, bro. Absolutely opened the floodgates. And then from that moment forth, my entire narrative changed. I was talking about health and wellness. That went out the door. I sort of took a step away from my business at the time, and my entire focus was on addiction and helping others overcome any form of compulsive behavior that was showing up in their life. And it's just rippled, bro. Absolutely rippled from there. I remember starting and opening my first sort of free 5-day experience. I probably had like 40 people. I'd say 20 of them were friends that I was asked to be in the group to make it look like there were more people than there were. The next one after that I ran, I had probably, I think, maybe about 140 people who came through, which was amazing. And then the one after that I ran, I haven't always run these free experiences, but when I have, it's just snowballed. The one after that had about 600 people come through the doors. And then I just created the flow-on effect from that was creating my signature group program, which I run today, which is called Line in the Sand. And that group program I've been running regularly for the last 2 years, which is really that. It's this felt sense and trauma-informed approach to healing addiction. And it's, I've been lucky enough to be able to just hold spaces that have helped, change the lives of really hundreds of men and women. I help a lot of women. I actually help more women than I do men. I think that's a reflection of the female's willingness to actually create some change in their life. They have seemed to have, from my experience, more of an acceptance of actually, and willingness to do the work. And it's been phenomenal. like what my life looks like today, bro. I shared this on a live. I don't, not so much what it looks like, but how I feel about myself is more important. You know, I feel freedom, I feel liberation, I feel confidence, I feel connected. Probably the best piece about this entire journey is the connection and the relationship that I have with myself, first and foremost, not to mention the connection and relationships I have with one of the most incredible communities I could have ever possibly fathomed or imagined in my life. You know, the freedom, the safety, the comfort I feel within my own body and being, the truth and authenticity of who I am and what I'm here to do and serve and create and teach and preach is, there's no distortion. You know, it's just total conviction, which I never had because I didn't even know who I was, bro. You know, I spent most of my life being a chameleon, absolute chameleon, lying to myself and everyone. You know, that same workshop that I spoke about, one of the biggest takeaways was I realized, you know, one of the first exercises, we walked in the room and we got into groups. And before even talking to one another, what we had to do is sit down and write on a piece of paper our first impressions of everybody. And then we received everybody's first impressions of us, which was confronting because all of these first impressions from other people was like withdrawn, held back, reserved, walls up. And then later that weekend, we did a feedback exercise with family and friends. And the feedback from family and friends was the complete opposite. It was like open, enthusiastic, joyful, charismatic, you know, can't shut them up. And so I got to look at this and I was like, wow, there's a real disconnect between these two pieces of feedback here. And what I saw in that and what I observed was how much I would sit back and kick back with strangers to figure out who I needed to be in order for them to like and love me and accept me and improve of me.
Yeah.
My like through line diminisher or mask, as you will, was seeking approval of others. I needed you to love me because I don't know how to love myself. And I don't need that anymore, bro. I can just be me. I'm happy being me because I fucking love me for me and I love how I show up. I love who I am. You know, I have a beautiful relationship with me, and that doesn't mean that I don't have my off days. Doesn't mean I don't have my days where I still maybe beat myself up occasionally. But I can catch it and I can have the tools to do something differently and show up differently. I think that's the key component in sort of separation between where I was and where I am today is, although life's still life's, and you know, this is the same as what I teach people, life's still always going to life will still always throw you curveballs, but I don't only have alcohol as my backstop now, or drugs as my backstop. I've got a myriad and plethora of alternative coping strategies, effective coping strategies that I can lean on before I would even think of turning to drugs or alcohol. Which that's the game changer. That's what I teach people, bro, is self-empowerment. Basically, you know, although my program might be, you know, it's only 6 weeks. It's a 6-week program. It's quite short. It's a very short amount of time. But I'm enabling and empowering people to make this a lifestyle change, not a one and done. None of this healing journey is a one and done. It's a process. But if we can arm people with the tools to evidently and ultimately take themselves in to their own bodies and being, and to start to self-inquire and recognize some of these patterns and habits, and ultimately the foundations of what they're birthed out of, then they've got tools that they can handle anything that comes their way.
So, what do you think it is about these establishment houses that people go to for help that it's stuck on a path that isn't necessarily effective? Why is that, and how have they not changed?
I think old models, old systems. Things change slowly, right? We're seeing it right now play out globally. Things change slowly. People catch on slowly. Science takes a while to make it from cutting edge to mainstream. Um, so it's shifting slowly, slower than I'd like, but it is shifting.
Hmm.
And I think, especially in the terms of addiction, if you're not in a conversation or a facility or a support network that is not talking about trauma in the same conversation as addiction, you're in the wrong place.
Yeah.
Simple as that. You are in the wrong place. And unfortunately, it just isn't yet as much of a more mainstream narrative as it gets to be. But it is 100% becoming that way. I think the more we can implement the trauma-informed approach into literally everything in life,
Yeah.
especially the medical system, medical care, mental health, addiction, and start to look and see as what, like, start treating the root causes. Like, unfortunately, so much of any medical system is set up as treating symptoms. We treat symptoms. We'll medicate symptoms.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, a lot of that driving force is founded in making money. It's really easy to treat people's hurt and pain. There's not a lot of money in creating sustainable changes in people's lives because there's no return customers.
That's awfully
So,
depressing.
it's very depressing. And that's a whole nother conversation in itself. I think, if you look on a global scale, marketing, sales
Hmm.
is built out of pulling on humans' insecurities. It's built out of the foundational principles on addiction. I'll sell to you from a place of you believing it to be true that you need something from outside of yourself to make you feel whole and complete,
Yeah.
to make you feel more than, to make you feel worthy. And so we're constantly bombarded and berated with, like, you need the house or the car or the fake tits or the fake lips or the whatever to give you a sense of self-worth because you don't know how to cultivate that from within yourself. And, these are the foundational core ineffective belief systems in all of us. It doesn't matter who I've worked with, who I've supported over the years, hundreds and hundreds of people. Underneath it all are these core belief or inhibiting imprints of, I'm not worthy, I'm not lovable, I'm not enough as I am, I'm not accepted, or I'm just not deserving. They're all built out of the same foundational principles. Basically, I'm just not enough. I'm not enough as I am. And because I'm not enough as I am, no one's going to love me as me. And so I've got to be somebody else, or I've got to take something or use something from outside of myself, or buy something from outside of myself to create that sense of worth, to create that sense of wholeness, to create that sense of safety, that create that sense of self-acceptance, create that sense of now I can fit in. So there's some big pieces in the mainstream narrative and conditioning, global conditioning, that would really have to change to start to really shift the paradigm. But that's the macro. On the micro, it's just coming back to self, coming back to that relationship with self.
I think there is a great awakening, so to speak, happen. I don't like playing into cliche terms or anything like that. Like, it gives me a sick feeling. But like, I see more and more people talking about the spirit, the soul, looking within. One of the first experiences I had that was evidence of people being blind to something that was blatantly obvious to me is my stepdad's mother had a bird in a cage, and the dog was always under the cage barking at the bird. And the bird was sat there shaking in its entire existence,
Mm-hmm.
day after day, shaking. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought, this dog is traumatizing this bird. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and she couldn't see that by allowing this to take place, you're actually committing animal abuse almost.
100%.
This bird is in a perpetual state of fear. Its entire nervous system is breaking down, and it's having a clear physiological effect,
Yeah,
which would then breed disease.
100%.
And I
Yeah,
put this together, as a teenager. I just
yeah.
couldn't understand how someone else could look at this situation and not see something that was.
Well, that's the perfect example of a trauma response, right? A trauma imprint,
Yeah.
right there, like literally the most perfect example. And to take that a little bit step further, um, boiled down in its most simplest form is, yes, an event happens, right? Let's say that the dog barks, so there's an existential threat to our life, or a perceived threat to our life. Again, we don't necessarily know how to deal or cope with that perceived threat to our life. It creates this undigested life experience. It creates a dysregulated nervous system. We have a somatic response that we don't know how to bring to completion, and so it becomes instilled within our body and in our being. And often within these experiences, or within these trauma imprints, we create meaning and belief about ourselves from these experiences, I should say. And so we start to forge what we call ultimately our trauma informed identity. Some of my business partners have this amazing concept, which I love. It's so true that any personality test isn't actually a personality test. It's more a trauma test.
Mm.
Show me your traumas and I'll show you how you show up in life. And again, just to take that a little bit step further, trauma again is it's a buzzword these days. It's a buzzword in this space. It's a buzzword in healing and coaching and personal development. And what most people deem trauma to be is the acute traumas, right? These really quite catastrophic life experiences, the dog barking at you 24/7, as you just shared, or things like sexual abuse or molestation as a child, or having an alcoholic or an absent parent, or an incarcerated parent, or basically abuse of any kind, or living in a war-torn environment, being exposed to some pretty catastrophic experiences that no one should ever be exposed to. Those are monumental traumatic events. And I think that's where, like, when we speak about trauma, people think traumatic event. What I actually think are some of the more scathing experiences of our upbringing. These are all as a result of usually our what we're exposed to as through our childhood experience and our upbringing. More often than not, it's a result and comes from our primary caregivers, our parents. But what I think to be more damaging, in my belief and from my experience, is developmental trauma. And developmental trauma is often actually not having our basic human needs met as a child. And these can just be fleeting, momentary experiences. They don't have to be. It's neglect, basically. Let's just call it neglect. I mean, I would say repetitive neglect is actually acute trauma. Repetitively being left by yourself, or left alone, or being unloved. I'd say that's acute trauma. But when I sort of loop it back to developmental trauma, you could be super excited about your dad coming home from work, and you really want your dad to come and play with you, right? You're like stoked. You're like, yeah, dad's coming home soon, and we're gonna go and play catch, or we're gonna go and ride the bike. And dad had a fucking shit day at work, and dad gets home and he kind of casts you aside, and he just goes straight to the telly, turns the TV on, and ignores you for the night.
Yeah.
He, in his mind, he's just doing the best he can to cope with the shit day he's had. But in that moment, you were let down. You felt abandoned. You felt left alone. You felt unloved. You don't know that at the time, but this is going on somatically within your body. And as a child, we don't have the ability to blame our parents. We can't turn around and be like, fuck you, dad. Well, show up for me, like in a way that a parent or primary caregiver should. But so we make it mean something about ourselves, and we can't pass the buck on to our guardian or our parents. We make that mean something about ourselves. So in that moment, I might make it mean that I'm not worthy, or I'm unlovable, or I'm not enough as I am, or insert core wound, right?
Mm.
Insert core wound here. And I mean, looping this back to what you just shared, bro. So that's like the micro experience of trauma, right? On the macro, and what we're seeing playing out on the entire world right now is like one big giant trauma response. One big giant trauma response. And if we really want to go there, I could read this piece that my business partner wrote, but sort of just really quickly surmising it. It's like, it doesn't matter what side of the fence you're on. All you're looking for is safety. Whether you're pro this, for this, against this, anti whatever,
Mm-hmm.
all you're looking for is safety and what you want to believe to be true in order to create the sense of safety within yourself, to reaffirm your internal narrative, to reaffirm and reassure yourself that you're okay. And the more that anyone's resistant to or against your perceived sense of self or identity or your beliefs, the more you're going to dig in, the more you're going to bite back, the more you're going to react, because they're threatening your sense of safety. They're a literal threat to your existence. And so we're kind of like we've been pitched against each other, right? It's like this
100%.
giant trauma response playing out globally right now.
Mm.
And coming back to what you were saying about this, great awakening, I mean, what better way than to start to look at our own responses or our behavior, human behavior, I find fascinating, than to bump, be in an experience where we're bumping up against our shit. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't have that willingness, again, to look at and actually take responsibility for the way in which they are reacting.
Yeah.
And so, some people are, a lot of people are, a lot more people are than ever. A lot more people are using this time and opportunity to take a look at themselves and the shit that's coming up for them as a result of what's playing out in the world, which is amazing because there's also like some mass healing going on. But the flip side of that coin and the shadow of that is that more people than ever are in fear. More people than ever are feeling feelings that they don't know what to do with. And therefore, more people than ever are also, numbing out, distracting. Mental illness and instability is all-time high. Suicide rates are through the roof. Addiction statistics are fucking beyond anything we've ever seen. And most of it's getting swept under the rug because it's,
Oh,
it's
absolutely.
taking away from the mainstream narrative that they want portrayed out in the world at the moment. And I love that you mentioned soul, bro. Fucking, this is a problem of Western medicine. There's not a holistic approach. Eastern medicine sort of is more of a holistic approach to what I believe and deem to be these sort of three centers of the human body, which is sort of mind, body, spirit, mind,
Yeah.
body, soul. And it's treated as such. It's treated as a whole unit, as a whole being. Western medicine isn't. It's opposite. Western medicine is you've got a bodily ailment, and I'm not saying somatic emotional experiences. It's like if you've got a bodily ailment, you go and see a doctor or you go to hospital and we'll treat the symptom and we'll patch you up and we'll send you on your way. If you've got a mental or what is deemed to be a cognitive issue,
Mm-hmm.
of the mind, you go and see a therapist, a mental approach, which again doesn't work because trauma is actually stored in our body and it's a somatic experience. So you can't bottom down your way out of trauma. You can't top down approaches, don't work. But that's where you'll get sent if that's what's going on. If you've got a mental instability or mental issue, you see a cognitive approach, a cognitive doctor, a cognitive physician. And no one speaks about the fucking soul
No.
or the spirit. Like, that's way too woo-woo to integrate into fucking Western medicine,
Yeah.
let alone the integration of all three. And so, again, it's just a system of slapping band-aids, and there's no real actual change created until people like myself, like you, like a lot of the community I surround myself with, unfortunately, have to get to some sort of point where they're plugged into so many fucking systems that don't give them any answers or solutions or sustainable changes to their life, that they go, fuck the system, and start looking elsewhere and start going, all right, what else is there? What else? What are the conversations that people were having? Because the mainstream conversation or the mainstream narrative or the systems that I keep getting plugged into or offered or what one would think to be the first port of call isn't cutting it. So where else do I go now?
I even struggle myself coming between, like I'm a very masculine person outwardly, but I
Mm.
also I also have a high sensitivity.
Mm-hmm.
I'm emotionally deep, I suppose you'd say, but trying to go between this manly entrepreneur, let's get shit done, lift the fucking weights, run the fucking, and then connecting with people soul to soul as well. I struggle to find the balance, but I know that the real connection that I make is when I do that, when I build that bridge.
100%, man. Like, fuck, that's been the foundation of so much of my healing. I just spoke about this on another live with an old client of mine. It's like just the power of just talking, the power of conversation, the power of vulnerability, the power of openness, safe spaces
Hmm.
to share, safe spaces to give a voice to the things that you've never, ever thought about or wanted to give a fucking voice to. Shining some light on that shadow, shining some light on the dark parts of us that we've disowned. And like you said, bro, for men, we're conditioned into believing that if you open up and share from your heart and be vulnerable and show emotion, you're a fucking pussy most of the time, or it's not welcomed, or the people that you're trying to share with don't know how to hold it,
Yeah.
so they actually can't hold that conversation or that space for you. And man, the key to so much of this is actually just having and creating and being involved in safe spaces in which we can open up, in which we can give a voice to the things that we've never given a voice to. It's a huge part of my group program. And again, this is what an old client of mine just shared on live in my group. She's like, just the safety that was created in my group, in my program that I try to create as much as I possibly can within my spaces, to create that safety for them to probably for some of the first time ever be as open as they've ever been in their life. It's like when I just shared at the start of this podcast, right? It's like the first time I went to rehab, I was just like, oh, fuck, holy shit. There's just like the sense of relief of being able to give a voice to the craziness that's been running around my head. It's
Yeah.
like there's a freedom and a liberation in that, because you're starting to dismantle the spirals of shame that we've created for ourselves. Most of us through this healing journeys, particularly with an addiction, have been like deeply shamed by others, but also shamed by ourselves. First and foremost, like we're so ashamed of the behavior and how we've showed up that we keep it isolated, we keep it under the rug, and it keeps us sick.
Yeah. We're
And
we're inundated with signals as well, and
um,
those signals have increased since the advent of social media. So we've got all these signals coming at us, telling us one thing, but they're all sales pitches, like you said.
yeah,
So
totally.
that's makes them completely dishonest. You've got to disregard that and learn to listen to the voice inside and go through that conversation with yourself.
Yeah, yeah. That voice inside is unfortunately it's the voice that most of us have been running from most of our lives.
Yeah.
A lot of a core concept of what I teach in my spaces is this sort of differentiation between our ego and our higher self. The ego is that voice that sort of leads us astray. Its job is to keep us safe. It thinks it's keeping us safe, but it does that by keeping us in what's familiar, and therefore it's also keeping us small. It's that voice that tells you you're a piece of shit, that you can't do the thing, that no one loves you, no one likes you, not worthy. That voice. Everyone fucking has that voice, and for a lot of people, that voice is real loud.
Mm.
It's dominant than any other part of themselves.
Yeah.
They believe it to be them. It isn't them, it is simply just a part of them. And this is really basic sort of parts work or parts integration work. But then the flip of that is like tuning into what you just said, our that internal guidance system, our intuition, our inner tutor. I just call it the higher self. Some people call it God, some people call it source, some people call it the universe.
Sure.
Higher self's a lot more digestible for most people that are sort of new to this work. But again, everyone has a concept of that voice. There's been moments, maybe fleeting, but there's been moments in their life where they've listened and there's been something profound waiting for them on the other side of that door when they have listened. But again, the very nature of trauma disconnects us from that voice. Hurt, pain, the suppression of the modeling and conditioning of society turns us away from that voice, turns us away from that sense of self, turns us away from ourself, really. Again, it's, if you really want to go down that path, it's control. Because there's a lot of self-empowerment by tuning in to self, right? No one can dictate to you when you're really truly tapped in and attuned to that internal guidance system.
Yep.
No one can tell you what to do. No one can tell you what's right, what's wrong. You've got nothing but your truth. And that's not to say that your truth is always right, but it's your truth, and that's your authentic expression. That's the authentic part of you. And more often than not, it's going to lead us to expansion over contraction.
David Hawkins speaks about letting go in quite a profound way.
He does.
Yeah. And I think that's been coming up for me, quite a bit lately.
Yeah.
It's so interesting how patterns just exist, and in your life, your actual life will show you things that you need to see. And like you said, like you can ignore things, voices, things that pop up. Like I literally watched a comet crashing to Earth 3 or 4 days ago, and it was the most bizarre thing that I've ever seen. There were heaps of people around me, and I'm sure I was the only one that witnessed it. And it fizzled out like a sparkler shooting across the sky. And I was just like, fuck. I was with somebody and I said, did you just see that? And like, amazing. I suppose getting off a little bit off tangent there, but like I said, the letting go technique has been coming up for me, telling me, even though I try and work on myself all the time, but that control mechanism is, I think, a major mechanism. Do you think it's more so in men than women?
Yeah, I'd say from my experience and what I've witnessed in clients, it's more men than women for sure.
Does it have something to do with being the alpha in any particular given group? Having control is being the man?
Yeah, I'd imagine so. It's the societal conditions placed on what it means or looks like to be a man, for sure. Men are meant to be in charge or in control or running the show, which, again, can be, it's bullshit. And I wouldn't say that's more men as such. I'd say it's more of a masculine trait, albeit maybe a toxic masculine trait. And, for anyone listening that doesn't really understand the difference, any one human can have masculine and feminine energy. It's just the energy of the masculine, energy of the feminine. We're all, we all have both. But yeah, I know a lot of women that can be extremely dropped into their masculine,
Yep.
and they can still love the felt sense of control. But yeah, I would say it's more of a masculine tendency, definitely.
Awesome.
But
I think that
so what's the question around letting go? I'm curious because it's an interesting conversation. I reckon if you can nail letting go and market letting go, you're a rich man, bro.
I don't
It's one that's a lifelong practice, that thing.
100%, and I think that's where I'm getting to as well. It's a lot like some people try to teach meditation, and they teach meditation as it's not the perceived perpetual state of Zen that you're trying to achieve. You know, the
Sure.
blankness of mind. It is
Mm-hmm.
getting there, losing it, finding it again, and
Mm-hmm.
it's that practiced art of losing it and finding it and losing it and finding it.
Yeah,
Everything in this universe expands and contracts. Nothing is in a constant state.
for sure.
And even when we come upon societal issues such as racism, um, eh, all the different isms that are bad, it's it's a pendulum swing. We never come back to parity and actually put into place things that are just. We always overreact,
Mm-hmm.
and we find that in everything. So everything's got this swing and sway because that's what nature is.
Yeah, I think when you're integrating something, there's a lot of swing and sway, right? Like if you're learning something for the first time or integrating something for the first time, that pendulum swings way out to one end of the spectrum because you're learning, you're
Yeah,
growing, you're doing. It hasn't yet become part of your being. It's not fully integrated. So there's a lot of doing energy whilst you try to really integrate what the foundational principles of said practice actually are. And I guess the goal is to eventually come back to some sort of place of just integration and peace and harmony and embodiment where you don't have to do anymore. It's just part of the way you show up. And so those sort of pendulum swings aren't as extreme. But yeah, sort of coming back to letting go, I would say from my experience and what I teach is letting go is, obviously the opposite of is control. And I believe sort of what's tied in with letting go is surrender, trust,
yep,
faith. And that comes back to the relationship that you have with your higher self. If you can truly trust in that part of you, your higher self, again, I don't really care what you call it God, call it source, call it your higher self, call it just these higher parts of you, something that's a bit bigger than you and a bit more knowing, all knowing than yourself. The more you have full trust and faith in whatever those parts of you are showing you or leading you towards or telling you or directing you through, even if they don't make fucking sense,
yeah,
like that's your truth. That truth is bigger than you. And that's been my secret sauce in, yeah, really truly being able to let go and to, I mean, I guess the tying in with some of more of what I've been sharing today is a lot of my letting go process has also been like feeling, making sure I really feel my way through an experience rather than try to think my way through an experience. And the more that I can feel, the more I feel free. The more I feel, the more liberated I experience within my body. The more I feel, the less attached I am to anything. And I'd say that's kind of the opposite, right? Letting go, attachments, they're all interweaved and intertwined. The more I can just be in a state of unattachment and receiving guidance and acting from that place of guidance, life is happening through me. I'm not trying to control life. I'm just a channel. I'm just a conduit. I'm just, life experiences itself through me. And then I'm in a flow state. And when I'm in a flow state, fucking life just expands.
Yeah.
Life is just continues to reveal itself in the way that it was always meant to. Life just keeps presenting opportunities. Things just happen that I couldn't even think was even possible. But again, it's a practice. Like I'm far from being in that state all the time, not even close. Haven't reached enlightenment yet. I would say, maybe 15% of my life, maybe 10% of my life I spend in that space.
Yep.
But you've got to have a level of self acceptance and of just when I'm not, because if I'm resisting the moments that I'm not in that space, then I'm not accepting myself as I am as well. If I'm not accepting myself as I am, then I'm in resistance to some part of myself, and then I'm rejecting some part of myself, and the fucking loop and cycle continues.
You're not present either.
You're not present because you're trying to get somewhere else.
Yeah, you're projecting.
You're trying to get somewhere other than just where you're at.
Yeah, you're living your projection.
And so that's a bit more esoteric than what we've been sharing today, but that's so, if you're new on this journey, don't worry about that shit until at least sort of year 3 or 4 or 5.
Yeah.
Just nail the foundations first.
Man. So you've got another group coming up?
I do indeed. I've got was actually my last group. Line in the Stand as it stands will be no more after this last group. This has been, and I believe it to be the pinnacle of addiction recovery. If I'm being really honest, I mean, I'm tooting my own horn here, but there is nothing like it that exists. It is stopping because I've got into business with a couple of other men, and me and them are building out what will be basically the next evolution of recovery. It's not going to be public for some time. So lie in the sand as it stands and what it is right now. This is the last run, the last crack, which makes me a bit sad actually, because I've had some profound experiences myself within this group program. But it's a phenomenal experience, brother, for anyone that is. It doesn't matter what stage of the journey you're at. I've worked with rock bottom cases. I've worked with cases, they're just starting off. They don't even know what way's up at this point. And I've worked with top tier, high level coaches and mentors and public speakers that didn't even realize they had sort of compulsive tendencies or behaviors in their life. And the beauty in the way in which I treat and approach addiction or healing or just this journey of self is that it really caters to the masses. It really supports anyone and everyone that just wants to draw a line in the sand and choose to start to do something different. If there's some ineffective patterns of behavior showing up in your life that you're fucking sick and tired of, that are causing and creating some sort of problems or chaos or disconnection within yourself, this is one of the most incredible programs, I believe, to take you in and to start to give you the tools to empower yourself first and foremost. I just hold the space. I don't toot my horn all too much. I just hold the space. I give you tools that, I wouldn't even say are my tools. I've just grabbed all sorts of different things from all over the globe that I've taken on and reconstructed in a way that is probably a little bit more digestible. And I put them in this nice, neat little package after 5 years of sort of exploration and journeying myself and a lot of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars, to just be like, here, come along for a ride, come experience not only the tools, but the power of a group, the power of group accountability, the power of a safe container and space to share some of the things that you may never have shared before, to express, to be open, to communicate, to actually experience fucking love and understanding and compassion, so that you can start to peel back these layers, look behind the veil, piece by piece, bit by bit, as and when you're ready, and start to create some really sustainable change in your life. It's really as simple as that, bro.
Amazing. And I mean, I, I got to call myself out because that initial reaction to just say amazing, that's fucking that's it doesn't do it justice. I've met you and I've been in a safe space with you. I've fucking talked and we've seen each other as men. And what people that may or may not understand watching this, whether it comes through, we share, you know, that that relationship with our father. We share that. The experiences growing up, throwing ourselves into the party life for sake of trying to lose ourself or create some meaning because there is none.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much that we share on a man-to-man level, and I fucking see you as a brother. It just so happens to be completely that we're the Wild Brothers.
I love that. Fuck yes.
But if anyone, and this is open globally, isn't it? That people don't have to be on the Gold
100%.
Coast to
No,
join
not at
in.
all. Worldwide.
All right. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to link the link that you want to send them to, and if I can, put it in the pinned comments down below.
Thank you, bro.
I encourage anybody that has some sort of internal dialogue with themselves watching this. It's bringing up some type of conversation to reach out to Drew and let it play out.
That's it, bro. The very nature of growth is scary. I talk about this often. That monkey mind that I spoke about, that ego mind, will do its very best to try to talk us out of making any kind of change in our life. And that moment for everyone's different. That moment where you choose to draw a line in the sand is different for everybody. But just as you shared, bro, if some part of this is landing, if some part of your fucking soul, your higher self is like, bro, jump, like, bro, reach out to this dude, talk to these men. This is you, this is me, this is us. Like, it's time. Follow that hit, follow that nudge, follow that what may actually not be so gentle nudge, follow the screams that's probably been presented to you for some time now, and just trust and have the faith that you're seeing this and hearing this for a reason. This is in front of you for a reason. You're listening to this for a reason, and that something bigger than you's put this in front of you for that reason. And jump.
Not a lot more needs to be said.
Not a lot more needs to be said, my bro. I just want to say thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having these conversations. Thank you for just being you, man, and continuing to just shine the light where a lot of people won't or don't or aren't, and just continuing to put out, these conversations with humans that we're lucky enough to have in our community, just to hopefully land on the ears that may not have heard topics of conversation such as what we're having today spoken about in the way that we're having them, and therefore starting to sort of open the minds of those that are tuning in. So thank you, bro.
I appreciate that. I feel the same way. I do. I feel the same way because you're doing everything that I'm doing plus so much more. I'm just hosting. You're actually helping people. You've got the hand on their back and walking with them, which is so much more than what I'm doing.
Yeah, brother, don't take away from what you're doing. All I started doing was having conversations much like you. Actually, it takes me back, bro. I started doing a series it was live Facebook Facebook interviews with my community. It was basically a podcast, but it was just done in lives. I didn't do it as a podcast. I did lives, and I just started having conversations with people, and that was basically where I started. No different. And from something like this, it can just snowball. It can go anywhere. It can literally go anywhere. So I'm fucking excited to see where this takes you, bro.
Yeah.
100%.
I'd actually like to steer people towards your Instagram as well, because
Please.
there's a lot of content on there that people can go through and get a better vibe for what you do, who you help, how you help.
Yeah, bro. I'll give you 3 links. First link will be a link to my Instagram, which is at Drew_wild. I'll also give you the link to my website, which is www.drewwild.com.au, which has all the information about the Line in the Sand group program. And I'll also send you a link to my free Facebook group. It's basically a free online community, addiction-based healing space, where I actually have a ton of free resources and free content, tools that you can actually go and implement into your life, like right now, if you wanted to. That would create some massive changes in your life if that's what you choose.
Yep.
So I'll send you all those links, brother. And yeah, like I said, if you could pin it to wherever you want to pin it, that would be amazing.
No worries. Thanks for being here, man.
Legend. Thank you for having me.
All right, bud.
See you, bro.